The sound wasn't a bang, or a crash, or a scream. It was a snap, a sharp, dry snap, like a bone breaking in the quiet of the night. Then, the hum stopped. That beautiful, rhythmic purr of the 35mm projector that had been the heartbeat of this county for 50 years just died. The heartbeat stopped, and in a packed drive-in, silence isn't quiet. It's loud. It's the sound of 300 dreams waking up at once. Arthur Miller didn't curse. He didn't kick the metal stand. He just froze, his hand hovering over the hot lamp house, staring at the screen out in the field. It went black. 300 cars were parked out there, families wrapped in blankets, waiting for the climax of an old western, and suddenly, they were sitting in the dark. Then, the honking started. Not angry honking, but confused, rhythmic beeps echoing off the pine trees. Arthur looked down at the broken sprocket in his hand. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was the end. He knew the letter was sitting on his desk downstairs, the one with the red stamp from the city council. Condemned, it said, or rezoning, which is just a polite word for erasure. Tonight was supposed to be the proof that the Starlight Drive-In still mattered. Tonight was the inspection, and looking out that small glass window at the sea of darkness, Arthur felt his chest tighten, because standing right there by the concession stand, illuminated by the red glow of the exit sign, was the one person waiting for him to fail. Now, you have to understand who Arthur Miller is to understand why that silence hurt so much. Arthur is 72, with hands stained permanently gray from film emulsion and machine grease. He isn't just a projectionist, he's a keeper of ghosts. He took over the Starlight from his father back in the 80s, back when people said VCRs would kill the movies. He survived that. Then came the streaming services, and the megaplexes with their reclining seats and waiter service. He survived that, too. Why? Because Arthur believes in the shared sky. That's what he calls it. He believes there is something sacred about sitting in your own car, with your own people, watching a story unfold under the same stars. But the world doesn't run on sentiment, and it certainly doesn't run on 35mm film anymore. The land the Starlight sits on, 12 acres of prime flat earth right off the new highway, is worth more empty than it is full of memories. The debts had been piling up like snowdrifts against the fence. Arthur is a proud man, maybe too proud. He refused to go digital because he said pixels don't have a soul. He refused to raise ticket prices because he wanted working families to afford a night out. And now, that stubbornness had a price tag. That price tag was being calculated by a woman named Diane Sterling. She was the one standing by the concession stand when the screen went black. Diane isn't a villain. I want to make that clear right now. She's not twisting a mustache and laughing maniacally. She's a project manager for Sterling Development, a local firm. She grew up in this town, too. She's a mother of two, drives a sensible SUV, and truly believes that what this town needs is a new lifestyle center, an open-air shopping mall with a gym, a coffee chain, and steady tax revenue. She looks at the Starlight and sees peeling paint, rusted speakers, and a gravel lot that floods when it rains. She sees a liability. Arthur sees a cathedral. She sees a teardown. When Arthur finally walked down the metal stairs from the booth, wiping the grease from his hands with a rag, Diane was waiting for him. The cars were starting to turn on their headlights, blinding beams cutting through the dust. The show was over. Diane didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just checked her watch and said, "Arthur, the equipment failed. The infrastructure is crumbling. The hearing is on Tuesday. I think tonight proved my point." She turned to walk away, her heels crunching on the gravel, leaving Arthur standing there, alone, realizing that the snap he heard upstairs wasn't just a machine. I had to dig deeper to understand why Arthur wouldn't just take the buyout. The offer was generous. He could retire to Florida, fix his bad hip, maybe learn to fish. But the next morning, Arthur wasn't packing boxes. He was under the hood of that projector. I went to see him, and the smell of that booth hit me instantly. Hot metal, ozone, and old dust. It's a smell you don't find anymore. He was frantic, calling every contact he had in his Rolodex. And yes, he still uses a Rolodex. "I need a Geneva Drive gear," he was shouting into the phone, "for a 1954 century model. No, I can't upgrade. Just look in the back." He slammed the phone down. He looked at me, eyes wild, and said, "It's not about the money. It's about the Saturday night. If this place becomes a shopping mall, where do the teenagers go on a first date where they can actually talk? Where do the young parents go when the baby is sleeping in the back seat?" He had a point. He was fighting for a social space that didn't require a subscription or a dress code. He decided he had one play left, the grand reopening. One last flawless show on Tuesday night, inviting the entire town council to prove the Starlight was viable. But he needed that gear. Now, Here's where the timing gets tricky. You've probably seen the news this week about that massive Arctic blast sweeping down from Canada. The meteorologists are calling it a historic early freeze, with temperatures dropping 20 degrees below average across the Midwest and Northeast. I was listening to the radio on my way to the Starlight, and they were warning construction crews to halt operations because the ground was freezing too fast to pour concrete. This weather front was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was making Diane Sterling's construction plans difficult. You can't build a mall on frozen mud. But on the other hand, who goes to a drive-in when it's 15 degrees outside? Arthur was banking on nostalgia to keep people warm, but the forecast was predicting snow, heavy, wet snow, right on the night of his final stand. The radio announcer was talking about power grid strains and road closures. The universe, it seemed, was conspiring against the Starlight. The cold was seeping into the old projection booth, making the metal brittle, and making Arthur's arthritic hands ache even more. But the cold does something else too. It makes the air crystal clear. Diane Sterling wasn't sitting idle either. While Arthur was hunting for parts, Diane was at the city hall, armed with charts and graphs. I spoke to a clerk who was in the room. Diane was presenting the economic impact study. The Starlight operates seasonally, she argued. It generates less tax revenue in a year than the proposed retail center would generate in a month. She wasn't wrong. The math was on her side. She even had a petition signed by the neighbors complaining about the noise and the traffic. She was efficient. She was prepared. And she was right, on paper. She stopped by the drive-in later that afternoon. Arthur was on a ladder, trying to fix the marquee. "Arthur," she shouted up, clutching her coat tight against the biting wind. "It's going to be 10 degrees on Tuesday. Nobody is coming. Just sign the deal. You can keep the projector. You can put it in a museum." Arthur looked down, his face red from the wind. "A ship in a museum doesn't sail, Diane. It just collects dust." She shook her head, frustrated by his stubbornness, and drove off. But as she left, her car skidded slightly on the icy gravel. The ground was fighting back. And this is where it gets interesting, because to understand Arthur's obsession, you have to look at the history he's protecting. I did some research, and here is a fact that blew my mind. Did you know the very first drive-in theater was opened in 1933 in Camden, New Jersey, by a man named Richard Hollingshead? And do you know why he invented it? It wasn't for teenagers to make out. It was for his mother. She was a larger woman who found the seats in standard movie theaters too narrow and uncomfortable. Hollingshead mounted a Kodak projector on the hood of his car and nailed a screen to some trees in his driveway just to give his mother a comfortable night out. The entire industry, this whole American icon of chrome and neon, was born out of a son wanting to make his mom comfortable. Arthur told me this story while he was greasing the gears. "It started with family," he said softly. "It was never about the movies. It was about accommodation. It was about saying, you fit here." That's what Arthur was fighting for. The Starlight was the place for the people who didn't fit in the fancy new multiplexes. But history doesn't fix broken gears. Then, the twist happened. It was Monday, 24 hours before the deadline. Arthur had failed to find the part. The old projector was dead. He was sitting in the concession stand, surrounded by unsold boxes of candy, head in his hands. I thought it was over. I was ready to pack up my microphone. But then, the back door creaked open. It wasn't a customer. It was Diane's son, Leo. He's about 12, a tech whiz kid, always on his phone. He walked in, looking nervous. "Mr. Miller?" he asked. Arthur looked up, grumpy. "We're closed, kid." Leo shuffled his feet. "I know. My mom talks about it all the time. She says the analog tech is obsolete." Arthur scoffed. "Your mom is right." Leo hesitated, then pulled something out of his backpack. It wasn't a phone. It was a 3D printed gear. I took a picture of the broken one when I was here with Mom last time," Leo said. "I modeled it in CAD at school. I printed it in carbon fiber reinforced nylon. It's stronger than the original steel." Arthur stared at the plastic gear, then at the boy. The son of the woman trying to destroy his theater had just handed him the lifeline he needed. "But why? Why help me?" Arthur asked, holding the plastic gear like it was a diamond. Leo shrugged, looking at the floor. "Because my mom used to bring me here when I was little. Before my dad left. She doesn't remember, but I do. We saw Toy Story here, but it wasn't about the movie. It was the only time she put her phone down. It was the only time she wasn't Diane Sterling, project manager. She was just Mom." The stakes suddenly skyrocketed. This wasn't just about a building anymore. It was about the memories of the very person trying to tear it down. Arthur realized that if he could get the projector running, he didn't just need to impress the council. He needed to remind Diane of who she used to be. But the obstacle was massive. The Arctic blast I mentioned earlier, it had turned into a full-blown winter storm warning. The temperature was plummeting. The wind was howling through the screen tower, making it groan like a dying beast. Even with the gear, How do you get people to come out in a blizzard? How do you project an image through falling snow? The odds went from slim to impossible. Arthur installed the gear. It fit perfectly, but as he tested the lamp, the power flickered. The grid was struggling under the cold. Arthur looked at the flickering bulb and knew standard bulbs wouldn't cut it through the snow. He needed the sun. And here is the second fact I learned that I can't stop thinking about. The projectors Arthur uses don't use regular light bulbs. They use something called a carbon arc lamp. This technology is practically ancient. It dates back to the early 1800s. It works by creating a literal bridge of electricity between two rods of carbon. When the spark jumps the gap, it burns at a temperature of nearly 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the same surface temperature as the sun. It creates a light so pure, so incredibly white and intense, that it can cut through rain, fog, and yes, even snow. But it's dangerous. It produces deadly fumes and requires constant manual adjustment. You have to feed the arc by hand as the rods burn away. It's an art form. Arthur had a stash of vintage carbon rods he hadn't used in 20 years because they were too risky. But for tomorrow night, he didn't just need a movie. He needed a lighthouse. He was going to light the carbon arc. Tuesday night arrived. The town was blanketed in white. The schools were closed. The roads were treacherous. The parking lot of the Starlight was an ice rink. Arthur stood in the booth. The carbon arc hummed like a jet engine, venting heat that kept the small room tropical while the world outside froze. He looked out the window. The lot was empty. 7 p.m. No one. 7:15 p.m. No one. The council members weren't coming. Diane wasn't coming. The storm had won. The rezoning would happen by default because of a weather technicality. Arthur felt a heaviness that wasn't just sadness, it was obsolescence. He turned off the exhaust fan, letting the silence creep back in. He had the gear. He had the light. He had the will, but he didn't have the audience. He sat in his swivel chair, watching the snow swirl in the floodlights, defeated. He reached for the switch to kill the main breaker, to shut down the Starlight forever. His hand touched the cold plastic. It was over. Then, a pair of headlights swept across the screen. Then another. Then 3 more. Arthur stood up, squinting. It was a convoy. Not the town council's sedans, but big 4x4 trucks, plows, and SUVs. They were crunching through the snow, circling the wagons. It was the community, the local Jeep club, the high school mechanics class, the families with the heavy-duty winter tires. They started honking, that rhythmic, shave and a haircut honk. And at the tail end of the line, a black SUV pulled in. Diane Sterling. She got out, wearing heavy boots, holding Leo's hand. She wasn't there to shut him down. She was there because her son asked her to be. She looked up at the booth, shivering, waiting. The realization hit Arthur like a physical blow. They didn't care about the cold. They didn't care about the movie quality. They were here for the place. The adrenaline surged. Arthur grabbed the carbon rods. He struck the arc. The sound was a violent hiss crack, and a beam of pure, white plasma stabbed through the dark. The beam hit the falling snow and something magical happened. The light was so intense, thanks to that carbon arc, that it illuminated the snowflakes in the air, turning the space between the booth and the screen into a tunnel of diamonds. The movie started. It was a classic, Technicolor musical, full of warmth and summer colors. The image on the screen was grainy through the snow, but it was bright, defiant. Inside the cars, people were tuning their radios to the FM frequency, drinking hot cocoa, laughing at the absurdity of it all. Arthur worked the machine like a conductor, adjusting the carbon rods by millimeters to keep the flame alive, sweating in the heat of the lamp while the temperature outside dropped to single digits. He looked down and saw Diane's car. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was looking at Leo, who was laughing at the screen. Then she looked up at the booth. She couldn't see Arthur through the glare of the beam, but she rolled down her window. The air was freezing, but that beam of pure, white sunlight cut right through the cold. She didn't wave. She just closed her eyes and let the light hit her face, warming a memory she thought had frozen over years ago. The Starlight was alive. The movie ended, and the applause was muffled by car windows but visible in the flashing of headlights. The next morning, the sun rose over a glittering, frozen landscape. The meeting at City Hall was short. Diane Sterling stood up. She had the graphs, she had the data, but she also had the memory of her son's smile from the night before. She put the retail center plans back in her briefcase. We've reviewed the site, she told the council, and Sterling Development believes that the soil conditions aren't right for heavy construction. It was a lie, a white lie, but everyone knew it. Instead, she continued, we propose a mixed-use designation. We build the retail center on the north plot, but the 12 acres of the Starlight remain as a designated community heritage site with a grant for historical preservation. Arthur, sitting in the back row, didn't cheer. He just nodded, tipping his cap. A compromise. The drive-in would stay, but he had to modernize the concession stand and maybe host a farmer's market on weekends. He could live with that. Arthur is back in the booth tonight. The weather has warmed up a bit, typical for this crazy December. He's teaching Leo how to thread the film. The boy is a natural. He understands the mechanics better than Arthur ever did. The Starlight isn't just a business anymore. It's a non-profit, owned by the town, run by the man who saved it. They kept the carbon arc lamp, though they only use it for special occasions. It's too expensive to run every night. But it's there, ready to burn with the heat of the sun if the darkness ever gets too thick. It turns out, we don't save things because they are efficient. We save them because they anchor us. As Arthur likes to say when he flips that final switch and the credits roll, the future is coming, whether we like it or not. But it's up to us to decide what we pack in our suitcase to take with us. And I think a little bit of Starlight is worth the extra weight. I'm the investigator. Keep looking up.